Rankings.
Hello and welcome to round 16 of the TPO Rankings Show, a show where we discuss Australian football through the lens of the TPO rankings. You can think of it like the FIFA World Rankings, but for 197 Australian football clubs, soon to be about 350. We'll talk to you about that another time. Jake joins me on Skype via Brisbane. Jake, how are you this evening?
Very well, Cody. Very well. How are you going today?
Yeah, doing real well. Thank you. Good start to the week. But looking forward to this show. As I don't really know what to expect, Jake's come up with a bit of a fun segment around home field advantage. Does it exist in the NPLs around Australia? Or are you better off playing from home sometimes? and how does that differ from maybe competition to competition, state to state? So that's all I've got. But you guys know as much as me. Jake has a little bit up his sleeve.
I do like, Cody, that you say a little interesting segment. I should say that for those that are into the data and like to get into or nerd out on some of the stats and numbers, then it's definitely interesting, and I'll try and make it interesting for those who aren't that way inclined.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be interesting. It's a discussion you hear sometimes in the A-League. Some clubs do very well away from home and not so well at home. So let's see how it plays out in some of the NPL leagues. But first, as always, we go to the recap. So we had 4 games we previewed from the weekend. I'll start with my 2 games. We had the Moreland derby, City versus Zebras, and we both went into the game backing Zebras. They were slight favourites, and actually Moreland City got up 3-2. So there you go. Zebras, off the back of that loss, have fallen 3 spots to 60th on the rankings. Moreland City have climbed 3 places to 63rd. So they're very close, and basically fighting for the honour of the highest ranked Victorian NPL 2 club. That's pretty much all I want to say about that one. My next game was Adelaide Raiders in the South Australian Div 1 competition. Adelaide Raiders versus White City Woodville. So this is the only game out of the 4 the TPO rankings and the TPO supporters differed on in the voting. We backed White City and the supporters backed Raiders. Result was 1-1. So in terms of the voting, that game is actually scrapped because you can't vote for a draw on Instagram stories. You only got two options. In terms of the rankings, White City were slight favourites. So although they drew, they actually dropped a few TPO points, but they stayed in the same position, so 82nd on the rankings. And the Raiders actually climbed 4 spots up to 84th, so only 2 spots behind them there. Jake, your 2 games.
Yes, and I went to New South Wales this week, so I had the NPL 2 games, the top of the table clash between Sydney Olympic and APIA Leichhardt. These 2 teams obviously played each other as well during the week in the FFA Cup, and APIA had a win there and knocked out Sydney Olympic. We backed APIA as the favourites for this game as well, and the supporters also picked APIA, and it ended up in a 1-1 draw, so another one of those ones that will get scrapped for the purposes of our voting. A combination of this, because usually when we look at the movement in TPO rankings, we look over the last 7 days. So a combination of this league result, the draw, and also the APIA win in the FFA Cup through the week, it's actually seen APIA move above Blacktown City. They're up into 12th in the TPO rankings. Olympic, on the other hand, have actually fallen 1 place to 18th in the rankings. So they picked up a few TPO points in the draw, but the loss through the week has sent them down. The second game I had was, as I said, also in the New South Wales NPL. It was Blacktown City and Sydney United on Sunday. We had Blacktown City as the favourites in this one. Supporters, you guys also picked Blacktown City, and we were both wrong in this case. So United got up 1-0. And Blacktown, that kind of rounds out a pretty average or poor week for them. They lost in the FFA Cup, and it's the first time they haven't made the round of 32 in... So 4 years out of 4 they had qualified, got knocked out by Rockdale City Suns, and then they have obviously lost this weekend against United. So in terms of the rankings, they've actually fallen down to 14th place. So they've dropped below APIA and Central Coast Mariners, so they're no longer above the A-League clubs. Sydney United in this on the back of this win picked up some TPO points, but they actually stay in 20th.
Okay.
And those were my 2 games.
Awesome. So, out of 4 games, 2 were draws, so we scrapped them. So, out of 2, the remaining 2, we both got 0. That's pathetic. I think that might be the first week we didn't get any right. Granted, we only previewed 4 games, but Not a good showing, guys. Not very.
I'm
not very good at all.
gonna put this on you a little bit, Cody, because you keep restricting me to only 2 or 3 games when I really want to pick them all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we could be here all night, I guess, Jake.
We would
picking
be.
20 games. So that keeps us on the leaderboard there. We're on 29 and supporters, you guys stay on 27. So we've still got that 2-point gap. I believe we've got about 5 games this week preview, but that's at the end of the show. Jake, any other movements on the rankings worth mentioning?
Yeah, there's a couple there. So Campbelltown City from the South Australian NPL, your favourite team at the moment, Cody. They're now in the top 25 for the first time this season, and probably the first time in a long while. I might actually go back and find out when the last time, if ever, they've made it. They're actually in 23rd. They beat Croydon Kings over the weekend, and dropping out of the 25, or in place of Campbelltown, is Green Gully, who have actually fallen down to 28th. A couple of other movements. South Melbourne, we mention them every week as they fall further down the rankings. They're down to 25th, so they're on the cusp of falling outside the top 25. They actually had a loss to Bulleen Lions over the weekend, who are bottom placed in the Victorian NPL, so not a good result for South. And finally, Olympic FC in Queensland. They're now the highest ranked Queensland NPL club. Brisbane Strikers have fallen very quickly. For a long time there, they were in about 22nd, 23rd, 24th. They're now down to 33rd after losing to Peninsula in the FFA Cup 3-0 last weekend. And then they had a loss over the weekend in the NPL here as well. So a very quick fall from grace.
That's crazy, Jake. You usually don't see clubs up that high fall so quickly. So, but on the other hand, a couple good, really big wins could see them come up a few spots. So it's not all doom and gloom for the Strikers.
It's getting pretty tight as well in that kind of from about 24, 25 on the rankings down to about where Strikers are now in about 30 or early 30s. The TPO points are actually getting quite tight, so that you can see the club move fairly quickly. And the FFA Cup results, as we've mentioned in the past, have a bigger impact on the rankings as well. So a 3-0 loss against a team from the division below you is going to have a pretty big impact in a negative way.
Hell yeah. Okay, well, that's part 1 done and dusted. Part 2, home field advantage. So, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Jake, as usual, I don't really know what you're talking about here. Give you a bit of freeway. But just let's take it away, Jake.
I just make this stuff up as I go, don't I? That's half the fun of it. But
exactly. Let's hear it.
I think I started this week looking for something else to talk about, and as I was digging into this, I just found some interesting data anyway and some numbers that I thought, that's worth talking about. So,
sure.
A little bit of context. One of the things that we factor into the TPO rankings algorithm that kind of sits behind all of this is the home field advantage. Now that kind of variable that's put in there, it's in essence, and I don't want to get into the details, but it's a self-correcting formula in the sense that it changes with the results. So if more home teams are picking up TPO points than away teams, the factor that is in that algorithm changes with that to adjust. So essentially we can look at that over time and see what it's doing to see if more home teams are picking up TPO points than away teams. So, and as you would imagine, over the course of a season when you've got every team playing each other home and away, we can get some pretty good numbers out of that. We're at the halfway point of the season for a lot of these leagues, some not even quite that far, so you can kind of take some of this data with a grain of salt. It's almost a snapshot, but it's not the full story. So the reason I've kind of decided to show some of this, because by itself it's not a particularly interesting set of numbers or story, but I have come across some numbers here when I split it out between all the leagues that we cover that I thought that was worth mentioning. So I'm going to get an image up on the screen for the YouTube watchers. If you're listening via podcast, I'm going to explain it, so you don't actually need to have the image there, but if you're watching the video, you probably prefer to look at an image than keep watching me talking, so that's why we're putting it up there. But what you'll see is we've split each of the leagues that we cover, and there's about, I think, 16 I've got on the screen there. So I haven't looked at A-League, I haven't looked at the National Youth League at the moment. It's just those 2018 leagues that we cover. Now, what we've got is, at the top of the graph, and I'll run through some of them, are the leagues that are currently showing that there is a home team advantage at this point in the season. Now, the size of the bar, I haven't got numbers on there, but the size of the bar, obviously the bigger the bar or the longer it is, the more of an advantage that we're seeing so far. So a couple of those leagues where we are seeing a home field advantage play out is the New South Wales NPL, the Victorian NPL, you've got the Queensland Second Division, the FQPL, and to a lesser extent, you start going down. You've got the New South Wales UFM League, ACT, Tasmania, and South Australian NPL. There's a couple of leagues in here, and I'll get your opinion on some of these in a minute as well, but one of these in particular surprises me that I'm about to mention, and that's the Queensland NPL, which is essentially showing so far that there's zero home field advantage in 2018, and they're a little over halfway. And the reason that one surprises me is because Queensland, more than probably any other state, has a lot of longer travel where they have to actually fly. So you've got a team from Cairns, you've got Townsville, you've got Mackay, we've got out to Toowoomba, Gold Coast, even Bundaberg. So there's a lot of travel, and that's one of the factors that I think usually plays into the home team having the advantage, particularly in a semi-professional league where you tend to fly in the day of the game, which can be tough. But probably the most interesting, or maybe surprising is the word, part of this is as we go down even further, the leagues I haven't mentioned yet that I will now. What we're seeing in this graph in the data so far is that a lot of these remaining leagues not only don't have a home field advantage, but we're actually seeing an advantage to the away team. And this is averaged over the entire set of results so far. So Northern New South Wales NPL, both of the Northern Territory leagues, interestingly, the South Australian State League, New South Wales NPL 2, but the main one there is the Victorian NPL 2, where we're seeing a very big advantage to the away teams. And just to put a few numbers around it for those kind of listening in the Victorian, I'll start there. The Victorian NPL 2, there's been about 150 games. 51 of those have been won by the home team, but 71 have been won by the away team. And in terms of the TPO points that are transferred, it's quite a large number as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit unsure as to how to interpret it in one sense, and as I say, as we play out the rest of the season, I'll keep a track on these and see where it ends up. But this is just one of those things. I don't know about you, Cody, but if I had to predict what this would look like before I ran the numbers, I would assume that there's probably a home field advantage to almost every league, maybe some less than others, and maybe near zero. But I definitely didn't expect to see, such a big advantage to the away team in some of these leagues.
Yeah, well, I guess there's an aspect of randomness there in that we're at the halfway point of a lot of these leagues, and now we'll see the corresponding fixtures, and then we can look back at the end of the season and actually go, okay, well, they've played home and away now. We may have just seen in Victoria NPL 2 the better teams were away more often against some of the... I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess I do agree in that if you had asked me at the start of the season, would there be a home field advantage in most leagues, you'd say, yeah. Less in some, but in all of them, I would say, yes, I think there would be. And it's very interesting to see that bar graph, Victorian NPL2 in particular. It's so negatively skewed to the away team. It's interesting stuff. But as you said as well, I am interested to see at the end of the season where this is played out.
Particularly, I mean, the Victorian one's really interesting because when you look at NPL 2, like we said, there's an away team advantage quite significantly, but in the NPL, in Victoria, it's the other way, and you've got the home field advantage. So, maybe it needs a bit more investigation on my part. I think that might be something that's interesting just to kind of look at maybe, like you say, part of it's going to be fixturing, and given we're only at the halfway point, but I don't know, it's an interesting one.
Jake, what I would like to see is we just concluded the A-League season a few weeks back, so maybe you could, in all your spare time there, run it for the A-League season of the year and see maybe what, in fact, that was, because that would be interesting. I would like to see that now we've actually had the competition finished.
I'll tell you what I'll do, Cody, and I shouldn't be signing myself up for more work because I've already got enough that I keep telling you I'm going to do. I'm going to look at the A-League for you, but I'll do it actually since 2005 because I think it'd be interesting to look at each season what that home field advantages look like over time.
That would be a really good graphic, I think.
Yeah, and obviously there's travel, there's different crowds at different. I imagine the home crowd obviously has an impact, and some teams have bigger crowds or more vocal crowds or intimidating than others. But there were times in the early days where I remember
like the Phoenix.
Like the Phoenix, yes. But there were times earlier in the A-League's life where I remember there being a lot of away teams winning, and maybe that's just something that stood out, but wasn't actually seen across the whole whole season, but I might go and look into that. So there you go. I've signed myself up.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, thanks, Jake, for that. Let's move on to this week's coming games. So I'm going to start with my 2 games and we'll let Jake wrap up with his few games. So I go to the ACT MPL. So the capital down there, Canberra. So this is Canberra FC versus Canberra Olympic. So they're predicted to finish first and second on the ladder. And these two are arguably the 2 strongest teams in the ACT. Tuggeranong obviously would have something to say about that because they're in second on the ladder at the moment. Canberra Olympic are sitting in third, so they're behind Tuggeranong. Just 1 point, but they do have 2 games in hand. So if they pick up a few points, they would be second. Going into the game, we have Canberra Olympic as favourites. They're 52nd on the ranking, while Canberra are 66. So yeah, Canberra Olympic favourites, but it should be an interesting game. My second game then is Forrestfield United versus Sorrento in the WA NPL. Sorrento are just not having a great year at all so far. They're 1 point outside the relegation zone. Forrestfield are doing a little bit better. They're 3 points above, 3 spots above Sorrento. And actually maybe even 3 points, yeah. But only 4 points outside the relegation zone. So this game is very important for both clubs in terms of survival, and I'm sure they definitely will both want to be in the NPL next year, so they need to start winning games like these. In terms of the rankings, Sorrento are on 81st, Forrestfield United 109th, which makes Sorrento quite, not heavy favourites, but definitely favourites there. So that's my 2 games. Pretty quick. Jake, what are your games?
So this week I'm doing something a little differently. Usually we look at the league games, but there's a number of leagues that don't have a round this weekend, mostly because of FFA Cup. So this week my eye is squarely on the FFA Cup qualifying games that are on around the country. The first one, I've got 3 here. So, and I should say this time next week we'll know, if not, I don't think we'll quite know the full 32 clubs, but we'll be almost there. So there's a number of games on the 9th, 10th and 11th of June this weekend that are very important. So the first one I've got is in Queensland, and it's Lions FC versus Peninsula Power. And it seems that we talk about Peninsula Power pretty much every week at the moment, and to be honest, there's good reason. They're undefeated in 18 games now. They're basically guaranteed to win the FQPL, and I don't want to jinx them, but they're so far in front, and they'll be surely winning promotion to the NPL next year. And last week they dominated Brisbane Strikers in the FFA Cup and got that 3-0 win. So they're looking really good. But Lions are in good form as well. They're currently 4th on the NPL ladder. They're predicted to finish second. And the last time, because these 2 teams obviously, for those outside of Queensland, these 2 clubs were in the Brisbane Premier League for a number of years, so they know each other well. But the last time the Peninsula was able to beat Lions was back in 2015. So the head-to-head probably favours Lions, but Peninsula are looking very strong. So the probabilities suggest that Lions are favourites, 40.8% chance of winning. Peninsula Power 36.7%. So quite a close game. Lions ranked 32nd in the TPO rankings. Peninsula 38th.
I'm really interested to see how our fans vote, Jake. I have a feeling we're backing Lions just slightly on the rankings, on our probabilities, but I reckon Peninsula Power is some of our supporters' favourite team. So I reckon they'll be voting for Power on this one.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I might actually try and get out to this game because it just seems like one of those that you don't want to miss. So anyway, moving on from that one, I'm going to the South Australian, the final down there, the last qualifying game between Adelaide Comets and Croydon Kings, and I believe this one's on Monday down there. Okay. Croydon Kings obviously having a pretty torrid season so far in the NPL. They were champions last year, so reigning champions. They're now in the relegation zone and less than 12 months, a very big fall from grace. But here they are, 1 game away from the national stage again. So that would be the second time we see them at the round of 32. Adelaide Comets, on the other hand, have never qualified, and they're having quite a good season. They came closest in 2016 to qualifying. As I mentioned, they lost. As I mentioned before, they're in 4th on the ladder. And in terms of that previous FFA Cup qualifying, they got to round 7, so this same stage in 2016, and lost. So interesting to see. I think they are coming out favourites, 49% probability of winning. Croydon Kings 29%, and Adelaide Comets, one of those clubs currently in the top 25 in the country. And then my final one is the Tasmanian final, the qualifying game down there, and it's Devonport City versus South Hobart. South Hobart, well known in the early years of the FFA Cup. They qualified in 2014 and 2015. They started the season in NPL down there quite slowly. They seem to have found their groove again. They're back up into third place in the rankings, in the table. Sorry, they're 5 wins from their last 5 games. But Devonport are also looking really good, and they're actually second on the ladder. So the only time that these two teams played each other so far this season, Devonport got a 2-1 win. So, form table head-to-head this year would all suggest Devonport City. The TPO rankings, though, are saying that South Hobart, who are ranked 43rd in the country, have a 59% chance of winning. So they're quite heavy favourites over Devonport, who are 73rd on the rankings and are given a 21% chance of winning. So this is one of those ones that if I was voting, I'd be looking very closely at Devonport City to cause an upset, at least by the TPO rankings probability-wise.
Absolutely. Oh, some interesting FA Cup games. Absolutely. That's exciting stuff. And guys, those 5 games will be up on Instagram stories on Wednesday/Thursday for you to get voting.
We should also mention, Cody, just quickly, that obviously since the show last week, there was a whole heap of FFA Cup games that have been played and finished, and there's a number of clubs qualified, which we won't go through the list, but get on the social media, ours and everyone else's, you'll see all the results there. Right now it's Monday night while we're recording. Guelph, Croatia, has just qualified. They beat Floret Athena 4-1. And as I look at the score, I've got the live score right here. Armidale is 3-1 up over ECU Joondalup with about 20 minutes to go. So ECU Joondalup looking good for qualification as well.
Didn't you just say Armidale were up 3-1?
Armidale are up. Armidale looking good for qualification.
Quality. Fantastic. No, we're leaving that one in. Cool. All right, well, that's the show, guys. Thanks very much for following along. As always, you can get a weekly stats packet we send out via email. It's a PDF, free for you to download. It's got heaps of interesting stats, what Jake puts together, basically to run our show each week, but it's full of much more we don't even really touch on a lot of the time. It's really interesting stuff from all the NPLs around the country and NPL2s, so get amongst it. You can sign up via our website, tporankings.com, in the footer of, I think, every single website page. Otherwise, just get in contact with us and we can put you on the list. Jake, anything for you to say before we head off?
Nothing from me, Cody. I think that's a wrap.
Legendary. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
TPO Rankings.